Montana Territory, June 1883. The sun had just begun to melt across the open plains when Thomas Edevane spotted her at the edge of his property barefoot, bruised, and holding a baby tight to her chest, like he was the only thing in the world that had not broken her. He stepped down from his horse, boots crunching dry grass. She flinched and pulled the child closer. "You do not have to explain," Thomas said, voice low and steady, her lips parted, but whatever words she had got caught in her throat. Her eyes searched his face, uncertain. "I mean it," he said. "You are safe here." She hesitated, then nodded once. Thomas took off his coat and held it out. "You should sit. You look like you have walked a long way." She took the coat with one hand, the other never leaving the baby. He watched as she sat down slow, careful. The child, barely a year old, judging by the size, snuggled deeper into her chest, cheeks red from the sun. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Etta," she said after a moment, voice hoarse. "Etta Jameson. This is my son, Henry." Thomas crouched beside her. "I am Thomas. My place is just over the ridge. There is food, water, and a warm stove. You both look like you could use all three." She looked down at Henry. His tiny hand clutched her shirt. Her own hands were shaking. "Please," he added. "Let me help." Etta nodded again. It was not trust yet, but it was something. He let her soak in the tin tub behind the house while he boiled potatoes and salted pork inside. Henry sat on the floor chewing a bit of hard biscuit and watching Thomas like he was still deciding whether or not he liked him. Etta emerged a while later in one of Thomas's old shirts, her wet hair braided back. The bruises on her arms and collarbone were darker now, rising like ink beneath her skin. She looked cleaner but not rested. She sat across from him at the table, eyes flicking toward Henry every other breath. "Eat," Thomas said. "You need it." She did, slowly, carefully. Like someone who had learned not to take kindness for granted, they did not speak until Henry fell asleep on a folded blanket near the stove. Etta sat back, one hand pressed to her ribs like they still ached. "I had nowhere else to go," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Thomas leaned forward, forearms braced on the table. "You do now." She looked at him, really looked this time. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," he said. She studied him for a long time. Then she looked down at her hands, picking at the edge of her sleeve. "My husband died last spring," she said. "He was kind, but his brother he stayed on, said it was for our protection, but he lied. Thomas did not move, but his jaw hardened. He started drinking more. Then came the bruises, then the threats. I took Henry and left 2 nights ago. We walked until you found us." He let a silence pass between them, letting her words settle. "You do not have to explain any more," he said quietly. Etta's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears away fast. "All I care about is that you are safe now. You and your boy." She nodded, voice caught in her throat. Over the next week, she stayed in the spare room. Thomas gave her space, but he saw the way she flinched at sudden sounds and kept Henry within arm's reach at all times. He never asked questions, never pressed. He just let her be. He found her in the garden one morning, sleeves rolled up, planting beside the rose he had started weeks ago. "You do not have to work," he said. "I want to," she replied. "It feels good to do something with my hands." He watched her dig, dirt under her fingernails, sun warming her skin. The bruises were fading now. "You are good at it," he said. She glanced up, surprised. Then she smiled, small and uncertain but real. It was the first time he saw her smile. Henry toddled after Thomas like a shadow some days, dragging a wooden spoon through the dirt or babbling nonsense words while Thomas chopped wood. Etta watched from the porch, arms folded over her knees. "You are good with him," she said one afternoon. Thomas shrugged. "Never had much family, but I like him. He is a strong little thing." Etta looked down at her hands. "He is all I have." Thomas looked at her, really looked. You both have more now. She met his eyes. There was something different in her gaze, less fear, more light. It was raining the first time she touched his hand. They were sitting by the fire, Henry asleep upstairs. She reached for the teapot, her fingers brushing his. She froze, but Thomas did not pull away. He turned his hand, slow and steady, until their palms met. Etta looked at him, heart in her throat. "I do not know what this is," she whispered. "It does not have to be anything yet," he replied, "but I would like it to be." She nodded, eyes searching his. "I have not felt safe in a long time," she said. "You are now," he said, and meant it. The next day she kissed him. They were out by the barn, sky bright and air soft after the storm. She was laughing at something he had said, and then she was not. She was just looking at him, lips parted, eyes warm. She leaned in first. He met her halfway. It was not rushed. It was not wild. It was simple, honest, true. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I did not think I would ever feel this again," she said. Thomas cupped her cheek. "You deserve every bit of it." And in that moment she believed him. The stream behind the cabin ran clearer after the rain, and Etta knelt beside it, sleeves damp to the elbow, scrubbing a shirt against the smooth stone Thomas had placed there for washing. The morning sun filtered through the cottonwoods, dappling her hands with shifting gold. A robin darted across the water, and for a moment she simply watched it, the rhythm of her breath almost even. Behind her, Henry babbled to a wooden ox Thomas had carved, dragging it through the dirt with single-minded devotion. Etta straightened and wiped her hands down her skirt, eyes on her son. He was speaking more now, odd little sounds that carried meaning only she understood, but they were fuller, brighter. He looked lighter too. Thomas stepped into view, swinging a pail from one hand. His shirt was open at the throat, collar damp with sweat. He crouched beside her, setting the pail near her feet. "Pump's fixed," he said. "Split the leather washer with a knife and trimmed it down. Should draw water again by tomorrow." She nodded, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "You know how to mend most anything, don't you?" "Had to," he said. "No one else around to do it." She dipped the shirt back into the stream. "You always been alone out here." He sat back on his heels, eyes narrowing slightly as he looked toward the distant ridges. "I built this place after the war. Took 2 years, just me and the mule. Neighbors are a half-day's ride. Folks pass through, but they never stay." She paused, hands still in the water. "Why'd you stay?" He glanced at her. "I like the quiet." "Doesn't ask anything of me." Etta looked away, jaw tight. He reached for the edge of the shirt she was wringing out. "But I'm learning there's good in the asking too." She let him take it, let his fingers brush hers. The silence stretched between them, but it didn't feel empty. That night, Henry fussed long past dusk. They took turns pacing the floorboards, Etta humming low while Thomas rocked him gently, one arm curled beneath the boy's back. When Henry finally dropped off, his lashes dark against his cheeks, Thomas laid him down softly and stood there a moment, one hand on the edge of the blanket. Etta watched from the doorway, arms folded. "He doesn't cry like he used to," she said. Thomas stepped back, careful not to scuff the floor with his boots. "He's learning he doesn't have to." She didn't look away from her son. "I'm not sure I've learned that yet." Thomas didn't speak. He just waited. She turned toward him, leaning in the frame. "I keep thinking it can't hold. That something'll come and undo it all." He took a slow step forward. "What would you need to believe it could hold?" She swallowed hard. "Time," he nodded. "You've got it." The next morning she found a chair mended on the porch. Its leg had been cracking since the rain, and Thomas hadn't said a word about fixing it. She ran her hand along the smooth joint, the new dowel flush and clean. Later, when Thomas came back from checking the fence line, she was waiting with a pot of chicory and 2 tin cups. She poured one and held it out. "It's bitter," she said. Didn't have much to sweeten it. "That's all right," he said, taking it. "I'm used to bitter." They sat in silence for a while, watching Henry chase a grasshopper across the yard. The breeze stirred the hem of Etta's skirt and caught a loose strand of her braid. "I used to think being alone made me strong," she said. Thomas took a sip. "Not anymore. I think it just made me harder, not stronger." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "There's a difference." She turned to him. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd need answers, proof, an explanation." He studied the horizon. "You said enough the first day." She looked down into her cup. "I keep waiting for the fear to come back. When it does," he said, "you won't face it alone." Evening settled gently, the sky soft with lavender and dust. Etta stood by the window, watching Henry sleep. Thomas was outside, stacking wood for the stove. She listened to the thud of each piece, slow and even. She reached for the shawl near the hearth, ran her hands along its edge, then stepped out into the cooling air. He looked up as she approached, setting down the last log. "I want to stay," she said. Thomas didn't answer right away. He let the words settle. "You don't have to decide all at once," he said. "I already did," she said. "I just hadn't said it out loud." He nodded once. "Then I'll build another bed." She stepped closer. "You don't have to fix everything." His eyes met hers. "I want to." She reached for his hand, this time without hesitation. He took it. Neither of them let go. The wind shifted as summer deepened, carrying the warm scent of pine from the east ridge. Etta stood near the barn with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, mending the hem of Thomas's work shirt where it had torn along the seam. The needle dipped through the fabric in a steady rhythm, her fingers sure and clean despite the coarse weave. Inside the barn, Thomas worked the chestnut mare's hoof, rasping it smooth where the nail had splintered. He glanced up when Etta stepped into the doorway. "She wasn't favoring her leg this morning," Etta said, her voice low. "But she didn't eat much." "She's nearing foaling season," Thomas replied, brushing sawdust from his hands. "It makes her cautious. I'll keep close watch from now on." Etta folded the shirt over her arm. "I can take a turn checking her at night." He set the rasp down. "You don't need to lose sleep over livestock." "I don't mind," she said. "I sleep better with something to do." He nodded once and stepped past her into the sunlight. She followed, walking in silence until they reached the porch. Henry was inside with a wooden spoon and a bowl of cornmeal, his face dusted gold and his shirt streaked with flour. He was humming to himself, tuneless but content. Etta leaned against the railing, watching through the open door. "Did you always mean to live this far from town?" she asked. "I meant to live where the quiet didn't feel like punishment," Thomas said. "I cleared every post of this land myself. Didn't plan for anyone else, but I didn't plan against it either." She looked at him carefully. "Do you want to go back east someday?" His brow creased faintly. "No. I left nothing there worth returning to." "Did you?" "I had a sister in Kansas City once," she said. "But after my father died, she married a man who wanted nothing to do with the rest of us. I wrote once, but the letter came back unopened." Thomas didn't offer sympathy, just nodded, slow and sure, as if accepting another stone in the riverbed they were building between them. "I used to think I'd raise Henry near people," she said. "Neighbors, a schoolhouse, something close. But I see him here, and he's steadier now than he's ever been." "He's steady because you are," Thomas said. "He learns from you." She didn't answer, but her fingers curled slightly around the railing. Later that week, they rode into town together for supplies. Henry sat in front of Etta on the saddle, clutching a small burlap sack filled with dried berries. The general store was quiet, its porch shaded by a canvas awning faded from sun. Inside, Etta moved among the shelves, choosing carefully. 2 skeins of thick cotton thread, a tin of baking soda, and a small pair of scissors for trimming cloth. Thomas picked up a new bit for the mare and a pair of leather gloves, then paid with coins worn smooth from use. As they stepped back onto the street, an older woman paused beside them. Her bonnet shaded her eyes, but her expression was sharp. "You're Jameson's widow, aren't you?" she asked, looking at Etta. "Heard you ran off in the night." Etta stiffened. Henry pressed his face into her shoulder. Thomas stepped beside her, his presence quiet but immovable. "She didn't run," he said evenly. "She left. There's a difference." The woman sniffed and walked on. Etta didn't speak until they were out of town, the hills rising around them once more. "I didn't expect anyone to recognize me." "They don't matter," Thomas said. "Not out here. They think a woman with bruises must have done something to earn them." He didn't look at her. "Then they've never met a man worth his word." That night, Etta stood in the field with her hands folded in front of her, watching the stars rise. Thomas joined her without a word, standing close enough to feel the warmth of her shoulder beside his. "You never asked what I did before," she said. "I figured you'd tell me when it mattered." "I was a seamstress," she said. "My husband worked cattle, but I kept us fed with needle and thread. After he passed, I kept sewing, but his brother didn't like that I earned on my own." Thomas's voice was quiet. "He liked having control. He liked everything small and still. I never was either." Thomas didn't reply, but he reached for her hand. She let him take it, their fingers interlacing without hesitation. When they returned to the cabin, Henry was already asleep. Etta lit the oil lamp and trimmed the wick while Thomas stirred the last of the stew. They ate in silence, the kind that settled easy between two people who no longer needed to fill the space between them. After the dishes were cleared, Etta stood near the hearth, rubbing her palms together. "I want to build something here," she said. "Not just stay, build." Thomas leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "What do you need?" "A table that fits the three of us, a place to dry herbs, a line for washing, and time." He nodded. "Then we'll start tomorrow." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "You mean that?" "I don't say things I don't mean." She crossed the room and placed her hand against his chest. "Neither do I." He turned his face toward hers. She kissed him, then slow, unhurried, no fear left between them. When she pulled back, she rested her forehead against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her with the kind of certainty that didn't ask permission. Outside, the wind had shifted again, this time from the north, carrying the scent of ripe hay and something new, something lasting. The morning air was thick with the scent of wet clay and the faint sweetness of wild rose. Etta crouched near the east fence line, her skirts tucked beneath her knees, smoothing her palm over a patch of earth she'd cleared for yarrow and feverfew. A cluster of bees hovered near the edge, drawn to the flowering milkweed. Her fingers moved steadily, pressing seeds into the soil with quiet purpose. Thomas knelt beside her, rolling a length of wire between his hands. "That corner post won't hold through winter," he said, nodding toward the far end of the field. "Ground's soft from the spring runoff. We'll need to reset it before first frost." Etta brushed a smudge of dirt from her cheek with the back of her hand. "I can dig the new hole if you set the brace." His eyes flicked over her face. "You sure? I'm not made of porcelain." He smiled slightly, not with his mouth, but in the way his gaze softened. "No, you're not." She turned back to the soil and pressed the last seed beneath the surface, then sat back on her heels. "I never imagined myself living like this. With dirt under my nails and a child who sleeps through the night. Most folks don't imagine the lives that end up saving them," Thomas said. She looked over at him. "Is that what this is? Saving?" He didn't answer right away. "Feels more like beginning." That afternoon, Thomas retrieved a bundle of lumber from the lean-to and laid it across two sawhorses near the porch. Etta stepped out, drying her hands on her apron. "What's all that for?" she asked. "Our table," he said, sorting through the planks. "You said you wanted one." Etta's brow lifted. "I didn't expect it this soon. I don't see sense in waiting, not when we've got what we need." She moved closer, brushing her fingers across the smooth edge of a board. "You're cutting it square." "I was," he said. "Unless you had something else in mind." She tapped the corner. "Round edges. Henry's still learning how not to fall into things." Thomas nodded. "All right. Round it is." He worked through the long hours before dusk, and Etta joined him once Henry was settled upstairs, bringing a scrap of cloth to rub oil into the finished legs. Her hands moved beside his, and nothing needed saying. The rhythm of work was its own kind of conversation. When they lifted the top into place together, Thomas held it steady while she drove each peg into the joint. Her hair had come loose behind her ears, and a thin crescent of sweat traced her temple. She didn't wipe it away. As he secured the last dowel, she leaned against the frame and looked at him. "You build things like you mean to keep them." "I do," he said. She didn't look away. "And people," he set the hammer down. "Only the ones who want to stay." Her expression shifted. Nothing grand. Just a slow unfurling of something that had been waiting. Later that week, they took Henry to the edge of the southern field, where the grass grew taller than his knees, and the wind stirred the stalks like water. He knelt down and pulled a blue feather from the brush, holding it up with a grin that made Etta's breath catch. She took it gently and tucked it behind his ear. "You ever seen a bird that color?" she asked. Thomas, watching them from behind the fence rail, shook his head. "Only once. Back when I was trapping near the Judith River. Flash of blue in the snow just for a second." "Maybe they come back when you need them," she said. They walked back slow, the sun dipping low behind the hills. Thomas carried Henry on his shoulders, the boy's hands tangled in his hair, legs swinging in rhythm with each step. Etta walked beside them, her fingers brushing Thomas's elbow, their shadows long and joined. That night, thunder rolled far off toward the west, low and steady. Etta stood barefoot by the open window, watching the lightning flicker along the horizon. Thomas pulled the quilt higher over Henry's shoulder and crossed the room. "He'll sleep through it," he said. She nodded, arms crossed lightly over her chest. "I used to hate storms." He waited beside her, saying nothing. "Not the sound," she went on, "the waiting, not knowing where the crack would land." Thomas rested his hand on the sill beside hers. "I'll always tell you where it is." She looked at him, her voice barely audible. "You've never once raised your voice." "I've had enough noise in my life." "I think I believe you," she said. "You don't have to," he replied. "You'll feel it." She turned toward him, and the space between them disappeared like it had never mattered. She leaned into his chest, and he wrapped both arms around her. There was no need for promise or explanation. There was only breath and warmth and the quiet certainty of two people learning how to belong. The rain began not long after, steady and soft. It drummed against the roof as they stood still together, the child asleep, the storm outside, and peace earned, quiet and whole settled between them. In the last days of August, the air thinned into something drier, edged with a crispness that hinted at the coming season. The cottonwood leaves had begun to yellow at the tips, and each morning brought a hush that settled earlier and stayed longer. Etta sat on the porch stoop, Henry cradled in her lap as she trimmed loose threads from the hem of a small woolen vest she'd sewn by lamplight. Thomas returned from the far pasture with his hat in hand, dust on his boots and a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. He crouched down beside them and touched Henry's toe gently. "He's grown. Boots'll need replacing before snowfall." Etta nodded, tucking the vest beside her. "He's up to a full cup of oats, too. I'll need to stretch the flour further if we want bread through September." Thomas stood and offered his hand. "Let's walk the edge of the south ridge. I want to show you something." Etta glanced toward the open door. "He'll wake if he rolls." "I laid the split logs beside the cot," Thomas said. "He won't tumble." She took his hand and followed him past the barn where the smell of sweet hay lingered in the morning air. They walked in silence, her hand tucked around his elbow. When they crested the ridge, she paused, breath catching. Below, the land fanned out into a shallow valley where the creek bent in a wide curve around a small rise. On that rise stood a framework of cedar posts, roughly staked into the ground. "I started it last week," he said. "Wasn't sure how to tell you." She turned toward him, brows drawn. "What is it?" "A house," he said. "Yours, ours, one with a root cellar and real glass panes, room for Henry to grow." Her hand rose slowly to her chest. "You built a frame without telling me." "I wanted it to be a surprise," he said. "Didn't think you'd walk this far without reason." She took a step closer to the edge, wind lifting the edge of her shawl. "It's more than I ever pictured." "I've got lumber coming from Missoula," he said. "Just the floorboards and the hinges. The rest we can do ourselves." She turned to him, eyes shining. "You planned this." "I did," he said. "Not because I needed to, because I wanted to." Etta's voice wavered just slightly. "I never had anything built for me before. Not even a cradle." Thomas reached for her hand. "Then this'll be the first of many things." They walked back slowly, the sun climbing higher, shadows shortening beneath the trees. That afternoon, Thomas brought Henry out to the ridge, lifting him high so his small hands could touch the cedar post. Etta knelt beside them, anchoring a string of ribbon to mark where the kitchen wall would rise. By evening, they had laid the first sill beams together. In the weeks that followed, routines shifted. Etta woke earlier to churn butter and hang linens while Thomas worked the new house frame. Henry napped in the shade of a canvas canopy they'd strung from the corner joists, his wooden ox tucked beneath one arm. One afternoon, Etta found Thomas carving a length of wood smooth beside the cook stove. He didn't look up as she approached. "What are you making?" she asked, brushing curls back from her forehead. "A spindle," he said. "For a yarn winder. Thought maybe this winter you'd want to weave." She sat beside him, pressing her knee gently against his. "You think of everything." "I think of you," he said. That night she reached for his hand beneath the quilt and laced her fingers with his. "I want to marry you," she said, voice steady. Thomas turned to her. "You sure?" "I wouldn't ask if I wasn't," he nodded once. "Then we'll ride into town after harvest. Say the words proper." She smiled. "I don't need proper, I just need you." "You'll have both," he said. The first frost came a week before the wedding. Etta wrapped Henry in a wool cloak, and they rode together to the church on the edge of the settlement. The preacher spoke plainly, with no flourishes, just the truth of what they were to one another. Thomas said yes with his eyes fixed on hers. Etta's voice didn't shake when she answered. Afterward, they rode home through falling leaves, the sky clear and pale. That night, they sat on the porch of the unfinished house, a blanket around their shoulders and Henry asleep inside the cabin. The stars blinked out one by one behind drifting clouds, and the fire crackled low beside them. Thomas pulled her close, resting his chin against her hair. "You ever think we'd get here?" "No," she said, "but I never wanted anything more." He kissed her temple. "Then let's hold it with both hands." They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the night deepened, not speaking, not needing to. Years passed, each season layering over the last like slow embroidery. The house stood firm through each winter, its stones warm from the hearth inside. Etta lined the walls with herbs and dried roots, and Thomas built a second cradle when their daughter was born in late spring. Henry grew tall and quiet like his father, with hands skilled at mending and a laugh that came easy when it did come. They planted apple trees along the ridge and turned the far field into barley. There were hard days and long ones, and days where nothing seemed to change. But every evening ended with her hand in his, and every morning began with his voice beside her. And in all the wide, wild land, they wanted no other life.